Hey YouTubers, before I get started, honestly, I think it's raining pretty hard outside, so if you could hear that, it's not necessarily something I can control, so I hope that y'all are okay with that. Anyway, this is something I've been kind of wanting to do. I thought I was going to have to do it for New Girl first, but, you know, lo and behold, we got some pretty, I guess, depressing news if you're a fan. If you're not a fan, I do implore you to go watch it because it still holds up and it still has a decent ending. When all said and done, even though it's just 20 episodes, 2 seasons in. But we got confirmation from Cinemax that basically they're canceling the Knick. And, you know, with the way that show is kind of portrayed and the way it was built up, I don't necessarily see it getting any revived seasons or anything like that. And that's fine because, like I said, after 2 seasons, the way they decided to end it is something of great interest. Honestly, I'm not going to spoil anything here. Honestly, I don't want to actually go into that. If you think the show looks good or you don't think it looks good, then that's just of your opinion. What I will do is I will put the opening scene in the description section below if you want to see it. Not the whole one, obviously, because it's not necessarily something that I feel like is safe for all audiences. Be warned that this show is not safe for all audiences. It's very gory. It's very adult-centric themed and everything. But that, with all that being said, I think it is worth noting that the Knick, while not a groundbreaking show to any one degree, was a very good show. A very almost incredibly artistic. The soundtrack of it was amazing. The creative team, you know, not just with Steven Soderbergh, who's in my opinion, one of the greatest living directors, not only because he's incredibly talented, but also because he's one of the only directors that I can think of off the top of my head, if you were to ask me, like, who's someone who dabbled in everything, or dabbled in a lot of things. He's just one of those people who never really got himself typecast in any particular genre, and he, for the most part, has explored a lot of different type of stories. And as a creative force, I can really, and I think anyone who is a creative force can really appreciate that, where you see the same kind of artistic style be brought to action movies, comedies, drama, and all the other, and thrillers, and everything else that he's done in his entire career. And obviously, a couple years back, he said he was going to retire. We don't necessarily believe that when these people say they're going to retire. What they really mean is we're going to start focusing, we're going to focus more on writing, we're going to focus more on television or movies or anything like that. Like, no one retires, right? But what they do is they just focus on something else creative. And what he did is he's decided to retire from filmmaking, and then he basically immediately jumped into the Knick and any of the other shows that he's doing, like the Girlfriend Experiment and anything else that is slipping my mind at this point, if there is any. And the Knick is just kind of one of those shows. He gets Clive Owen to basically play the lead in the show, and like I said, I'll put the opening scene in it for the immediacy issues. If you haven't necessarily seen it, you don't know anything about the show, I would definitely check that out, because really, very honestly, I don't necessarily see a whole lot of shows where it grips me with just the tone, the feel, the expression that they're trying to convey so effortlessly in the first couple minutes, where you get an idea of exactly where this show is going and how it's going to be portrayed throughout whatever, you know, however long that it actually goes. And that's one of the sad things about this show getting canceled. It's not that it's a masterclass show. It's not like any other show. It's not like the type of show like Game of Thrones or Walking Dead, where you have a legion of fans basically going around and saying that if you don't watch this show, like, what are you doing, blah, 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 blah. It's not like that. It's definitely for a fringe group, probably a very much smaller audience than most shows put out there. Obviously, that's probably why it got canceled. It probably doesn't have the following that they really wanted, and it never really felt like a show that wanted to have just that particular following. It always kind of felt like they wanted something a little bit. They were reaching too far in terms of their expectations, because Steven Soderbergh actually talked about this earlier last year, about how what he wanted from the show is to essentially create the first 2 seasons and then hand it off to another creative force who would then, I guess, recreate it over 2 seasons and then again recreating over another 2 seasons. So basically a 6-year plan, which is usually 5-6-year plan is usually what shows come in with. They have a general idea of where they want to go. But that was a really interesting concept, and it is still an interesting concept, but maybe not for this show. And I really hope if he wants to do something like that, that he can find another property that would be more, I guess, more adequate than this show to use something like that, where you just basically reinvent yourself every 2 or 3 years. Haven't watched it, but I've heard a lot of people say that's what Homeland did. And, you know, from the group of people who like that show, I can imagine why they actually like that, because it's a cool idea. And but the whole point about them doing basically 6 seasons and how they were going to do it essentially kind of gives us almost a perfect ending for the show, be it you know, a little bit sad, a little bit happy, a little bit wondering how everyone's going to basically get on their feet after all said and done. But at the same time, it felt like a legitimate ending to the series. I think that's what they wanted, and they were going to basically jar you back into the world and recreate everything like I said. So even if you haven't seen the show, and usually, and it's so weird because usually when you hear about shows getting canceled before they were technically quote unquote done, usually that's not an indication or someone going around going, don't watch that show, because it never necessarily ended. And then you're left with so many questions and stuff, and you're basically hurt for the fact that you actually sat around and watched that entire series. And the same can't be said for the Knick. The Knick avoids that essentially by the way that it was structured originally. So it had an ending, and it had an ending that I appreciated. Honestly, after watching it, I appreciated where they went with it, but at the same time, it felt ballsy. And now that it's the end of the series, it feels really ballsy. It just, like, not even just ballsy, but just depressing. It feels very depressing, and it kind of takes, you know, for a show that took the trope that we've seen time and time again of an emotionally devastated and also just drugged up doctor. You know, we've seen that in House and other shows. It took it a couple steps further, and I'm not necessarily sure. I mean, like, I'm not an authority on this stuff. I'm just basically talking about how I felt with it without ever preparing anything, and I haven't necessarily seen the second season in a couple months now, but it was just from what I remember, it was quite good. and I really would like to see, where they wanted to go with it, honestly. If they could talk about it, at least in some level, of how they wanted to basically, I guess, take the show forward, I would really like to hear that. But at the same time, we got an ending. It's a good ending. And the show kind of went, told the story that it was going to tell, and I want to hear anybody's opinions or thoughts about this in the comment section below. Do you feel like it's a good thing? Do you feel like the Knick needed a season 3 in order to explain, you know, the devastation of season 2? Or do you think that it ended well where it ended, and even if they were intending to come back, it's still kind of a nice 20-episode series where we got an entire story that ended, and everyone is kind of in a better place or kind of moving on after that, and we don't need any more. So if you watch the show, please make sure to tell me in the comment section below whether you watch the show, whether you're interested in watching the show, or what are your thoughts on the cancellation. But anyway, guys, I'm just going to have to check y'all later. All right, guys.